Hey everyone, today I wanted to take some time and talk about what is considered by many to be the pinnacle of Spider-Man comic books. It's one of those stories that is considered by so many people to be an absolute classic, a must-read for a character who is really one of my favorite Marvel characters of all time. And that book is none other than Spider-Man Blue by Jeff Loeb and artist Tim Sale, first released in 2002. It was a part of a line of comics that was done by Marvel in the early 2000s that adapted some of Marvel's most popular characters' early adventures into a more modern package for new readers. A lot of these books have become popular for both new readers and dedicated fans as some of the definitive must-read stories for comic readers. Books like Daredevil Yellow, Hulk Gray, and other books are considered by many to be core canon for comic readers. However, this is perhaps true for no character more than the case with Spider-Man and Spider-Man Blue. This book, it takes some of the best Stan Lee-era Spider-Man stories and it brings these books to new heights. But while Spider-Man is my personal favorite superhero, and beyond that, one of my favorite fictional characters in general, I have never gotten around to reading this book. So yeah, it's been on my bucket list forever now, and for a few reasons I decided to finally pick the book up and give it a go. So I'm really excited to dive right into it and see what exactly makes it so special. Why is it considered a classic by so many? I think that I'm in a particular great state to enjoy this book now because over the past few years I've read probably about 200 issues or so of the original Amazing Spider-Man, so don't mean to brag, but I'm a bit of a, nerd. So yeah, this book will probably be great for me because it is highlighting some of those older Stan Lee stories, which, I do love, but they are definitely a little bit older. They have a certain Silver Age comic book type charm to them, but I would definitely be interested in seeing them done to be a little bit more, modern. So anyways, without any further introduction, let's take some time and talk about Spider-Man Blue. So, it's Valentine's Day, and there's a place I stop by once a year. Nobody knows, I don't make a big deal out of it. It's about remembering someone who was so important to me, I was going to spend the rest of my life with her. I didn't know that meant she would only get to spend the rest of her life with me. There's nothing I can do about it, and I've come to accept that. But when you lose someone you love, everyone tells you to pick up and move on. Don't dwell on the past. It is what she would want, and that makes me smile. Like I would ever want to forget you. The way your hair would fall across your face, the way you sipped your soda. Hello, Gwen, my funny Valentine. Wow, what an introduction. Spider-Man surrounded by the blue background, delivering this super emotional monologue, already lets you know that this will be a story filled with nostalgic melancholy. I particularly love the panel with the flower and the water. It's just filled with so much emotion and conveys so much meaning with one simple panel. Once treasured love between Peter and Gwen, now lost. Of course, everyone is familiar with the story that this scene is talking about. The death of Gwen Stacy is a super famous story in the Marvel canon. It's a book that many refer to as the end of the Silver Age, marking a new era of comics where writers could tell more serious stories with actual consequences for the main characters. This story is so famous and familiar that you've probably seen it somewhere already before, whether it's in The Amazing Spider-Man 2 or the original comics. You're probably familiar with the fact that Gwen Stacy dies, and if you're not, I'm sorry, you had about, 50 years to figure this out, so sorry for the spoilers there, I guess. Anyways, my point is that while this story is so popular and was famously adapted in the films, I don't think that there's a single iteration of Spider-Man that quite displays Peter's grief better than this book. The opening monologue is a beautiful piece of work and really sets the tone for the book. You just have a great sense of how Gwen's death has shaped Peter and how it's impacted his life. Honestly, the first few pages of this book present Peter Parker in a more human way than I think any of Stan Lee's books almost ever did. So, I mean, hey, that's a great way to start. The rest of the first issue follows one of the most famous stories in the early history of Spider-Man. It's when the Green Goblin has found out Spider-Man's secret identity and then tries to kill him and everybody he cares about. This was the first time that a Spider-Man villain found out who Peter was, so the stakes were crazy high and you were on the edge of your seat wondering, how is this all going to play out? In this particular book, we are brought into this part of the story with a scene where the Green Goblin has taken Spider-Man captive, he's got him tied up, and he's being held in a factory. And really quickly, I want to highlight how Tim Sale draws the Green Goblin. He has these big eyes with small pupils, and it really emphasizes exactly how unhinged and dangerous of a villain he is. So the sense of danger is totally there. But Spider-Man, of course, is able to come out on top in the end. We see him quickly break free from being the Goblin's captive, beat him in a fight, although the factory there and gets caught on fire in the process. Toward the end of the fight, we get to find out the Green Goblin's identity for the first time as well. It turns out that the Green Goblin is none other than Norman Osborn, CEO of Oscorp and father of Peter's own friend, Harry.
What? Why wasn't I told?
Now, this is nothing crazy these days, but, we gotta remember when the story was first released, none of this stuff had been revealed yet, so it is something of an interesting twist. Anyways, not only do we find out that Norman is the Green Goblin, we also find out that he experiences something of a double personality disorder. After getting knocked in the head a couple of times by Spider-Man, he ends up dropping the Goblin persona and goes back to being Norman for a bit. When he's normal, he is suddenly very confused about what exactly is going on around him. Peter is tempted at this point to leave Norman in the fire because he thinks that Norman is probably playing him and that this double personality routine is just some kind of trick. Not to mention, if the Goblin lives and knows about his secret identity, then Peter is going to be in huge danger. But Peter remembers that with great power there must also come great responsibility, and he decides to save Norman from the fire despite all of the danger that comes with that. But anyways, what's really interesting about this story to me isn't even the stuff that happens between Peter and the Green Goblin. It's actually the stuff that happens with the supporting cast and the stuff that happens after this fight. Peter goes to visit the hospital where Norman is staying at, and he finds Harry there. At this point, Harry and Peter aren't great friends. In fact, there's actually a little bit of animosity between the two of them. But it's here where Harry and Peter get to have a real sort of bonding heart-to-heart type moment, where Harry opens up about the fact that he's worried about his dad and his condition. Peter, though, reassures him, and he even shares with Harry that he doesn't have a dad himself. So it's a moment where these two get to be more open and honest with each other for the first time. Harry then thanks Peter before meeting up with the regular side character cast of Flash and Gwen Stacy, but we see our first glimpses of Gwen being interested in Peter when they share a glance with each other. Then we end the issue seeing the group becoming closer as friends and Peter getting a motorcycle, even though he doesn't really need one since he's, Spider-Man. But hey, Gwen seems to like it, so that's a win at the very least. Finally, the very last panel of this issue sets up a tease for the introduction of Mary Jane. Mary Jane was something of a running joke in the original comic. There was this girl that moved next door to Peter with her Aunt Anna, and despite Aunt May trying to get Peter and MJ to meet each other, they always just seemed to miss each other. There was also something of a joke that MJ was going to be the type of girl that you say has, a great personality, and, it's not a very nice stereotype, but it did add a certain layer of humor to when we are eventually introduced to Mary Jane, and it turns out she's like a model. Anyways, I really like these types of moments because they are the moments that sort of separate Spider-Man from other heroes. His battles aren't done when he beats the villains, but he's also struggling to maintain his relationships as Peter Parker as well. Seeing some of the character development here between characters like Peter and Harry or Peter and Gwen, it goes a long way to keep you invested in these characters, and the dialogue between the characters is really just so much better than it was in the Stan Lee era as well, so that helps to make the whole thing feel a lot more authentic as well. Anyways, the second issue follows a pretty similar format to the first one. We are presented with a flashback to one of Peter's early battles, this time with the Rhino. But before we see this battle take place, we start with a scene with Peter reading about the supposed death of the Green Goblin that was shown in the last issue at a newsstand, where we then see a brief foreshadowing of a villain character sort of in the shadows. We don't get to see who it is, but it's clear that they have it out for Spider-Man after the death of the Goblin. Who is this guy? Well, I guess we're just gonna have to keep on reading to find out. We then cut to Peter failing to flirt with Gwen, even though she's trying to set him up to do so. Poor Peter Parker, never had the best experience in terms of girls. Eventually, Flash bugs Peter off, and we see some more of modern Peter's thoughts about Gwen. One line that sticks out to me is the part where Peter thinks to himself that they would be foolish enough to fall in love. Again, we get to see Peter be guilt-ridden about the death of Gwen and the loss of her from his life, further reinforcing that more melancholic sort of tone that's present throughout the book so far. Peter then has to fight the Rhino, who has recently broken out of prison. He's able to beat him temporarily by having him trapped under some debris, but he knows that this isn't going to be a permanent solution, so he decides to reach out to his friend Dr. Kurt Connors, aka the Lizard. He asks the doctor to help him create some sort of serum or solution that can help destroy the Rhino's body armor. Because in case you didn't know, the Rhino suit is actually more than just a suit. It's kind of this like permanent mold sort of exoskeleton that is wrapped around his body, adding extra strength and durability to him. Dr. Connors is more than happy to help because Spider-Man previously helped him when he turned into the Lizard. Becoming the Lizard kind of put this big strain on Connors and his family, so by having Spider-Man help him out with turning him back from being the Lizard, he sort of thinks that he owes him quite a bit. So of course, Connor agrees to create a solution to dissolve the Rhino suit, even though making the serum does expose him to chemicals that can turn him into the Lizard again, potentially. Very subtle foreshadowing there. Anyways, thanks to Connor's help, Spider-Man now is able to beat the Rhino, making Connors really the real hero of this issue. Now, with Rhino stuck naked and his armor destroyed, Peter goes home to finally be introduced to Mary Jane. One of the most famous scenes in all of Marvel Comics is recreated in the book at this moment. Mary Jane shows up to Peter's door where he exclaims, "You're Mary Jane?" And then she replies with what is the now iconic line,
"Face it, Tiger. You just hit the jackpot."
This to me is a great introduction for Mary Jane's character. Her personality is very confident and she's somewhat of a natural flirt. Of course, while we find out later that this is really only who she is on the surface and that there is in fact a much more complicated and tragic character than we would have taken for granted at first, MJ's personality serves as a bit of a fun, nice contrast to Gwen's more subtle and laid-back attitude. Outside of another appearance of this mysterious villain hanging out on the rooftops, that's about all that really happens in the second issue. We're seeing the story move along and get the introduction of Mary Jane, learn a little bit more about how Peter's relationship started, but that's about it for this issue. So now we have the third issue, which is really kind of more focused on Mary Jane. We have this great starting scene where Mary Jane is hanging out with Peter's group of friends for the first time and everyone can't take their eyes off her. She is, like I said before, a natural flirt, and so she gets the attention of all the guys right away. We get to see a scene of her introducing herself to Harry, which is a bit of foreshadowing since they would eventually start going out. Anyways, when Peter shows up to the hangout, late of course, likely due to Spider-Man related activities, MJ immediately switches up her focus to him. Early Mary Jane is written to be something of a wild card, never quite being, pinned down in any particular relationship, but it's quite clear right from the get-go that she does think about Peter a little bit differently than the rest of the guys. So when she starts to get Peter's attention, you can also see Gwen touching up her makeup as well, trying to stand out against MJ to compete for Peter's attention. It's a small detail, but it's cute. Anyways, this fun isn't bound to last as we see a report on the news that the Lizard is back on the prowl. Yes, Connors ended up being the Lizard again. Who could have ever guessed? Anyways, Peter heads over to the scene as Spider-Man, and after a brief couple of bouts, Connors is defeated and returns to his usual form. The last thing that happens is we see Harry ask Peter if they can be roommates, and also tells him that he's planning on asking MJ out on a date. He also adds that Gwen is interested in Peter, so there's some foreshadowing about both their relationships there, although it's I guess kind of an unfortunate foreshadowing because both of these relationships are doomed to not work out in the end. Anyways, moving on to the next issue, we start with this scene where Peter Parker is eating a bowl of cereal, presumably with milk by the way, while also drinking a glass of milk. Does anybody else do this? I read this and I was just, I feel like this is too much milk, right? Anyways, this is completely besides the point. In this issue, there are a few interesting things that happen for the story. First, there is the appearance of the second Vulture, because yes, at one point there was more than just Adrian Toomes as the Vulture. There's this other character named Blackie Drago who takes up the role for a little while. The main point of conflict in this issue comes in the form of Peter having to fight this new Vulture while also trying to make it to this housewarming party that's being held on his and Harry's behalf, since they do decide to become roommates. A decision that will surely have no negative consequences whatsoever in the future, of course. Anyways, yeah, this is a fun juxtaposition, sort of cutting back and forth between the fight and the party, and there's one scene at the party that I particularly enjoy. It's the scene where Flash Thompson is getting jealous of Peter, basically asking, what does Peter have that he doesn't? Why are girls like Gwen and MJ paying more attention to Peter when Flash used to be the guy who got all the attention back in high school? I like the idea that the reason why Flash sort of is motivated to better himself is because he recognizes that Peter is, a more compelling person to these girls than, Flash himself is, while Flash used to just think of Peter as this being sort of like meek and lame, nerdy kind of person. There's just this beautiful piece of irony present here, and it's honestly a good character moment for Flash as well. It sort of elevates him above that traditional sort of jock bully stereotype. But yeah, not much happens until the next issue. In issue 5, we see Peter finally make it to the party, but of course, only after it has ended. And in addition, Peter has seemingly come down with some sort of cold or illness of some kind. So yeah, after his fight with the Vulture, he can't really do much else other than lie down and try not to die. But during this bout of sickness, we do get what is one of the funniest scenes in the entirety of the book, where first MJ shows up to comfort Peter with some good old-fashioned soup, while then Gwen also shows up with the Adventures of Huckleberry Finn to read to Peter while he gets better. So the two of these girls have this kind of passive-aggressive argument with each other, and Peter, with his classic Parker luck, is forced to tell both of the girls that he needs to get some rest, as he notices that now both of the Vultures are fighting outside of his apartment window. So of course it's naturally up to Peter to make sure that the two Vultures don't kill each other, but also he has to, stay alive himself. So while this is happening, both MJ and Gwen leave. Neither of them are particularly happy with Peter at this point, but Peter does manage to fight and stop both of the Vultures. While fighting the Vultures, Peter ends up having to save the life of Flash Thompson, and we get a great reference to Amazing Fantasy 15, which is the first appearance of Spider-Man, by the way, in case you didn't know. This save then further prompts Flash to do some more self-reflection and try to become a better person, adding on to that irony in the story that we were talking about earlier. So Flash's little character arc finally ends when he, at the end of this issue, decides to join the military, giving his character a nice little bookend for this story. So now we find ourselves at the end of the book, and just in case you find yourselves wanting to read the book yourself, I'm going to put a timestamp on screen now. You can fast forward the video to that timestamp if you want to avoid some of the more spoiler discussion that happens towards the end of the book. Okay, anyways, first and foremost, for the ending, there's this bit about this mysterious villain that we have been sort of seeing and hearing about throughout the book. Well, we do finally get a reveal of who this mystery villain is, and we find out that it is Kraven the Hunter. So, not a new exciting villain or anything like that, it's just Kraven. And I mean, like, hey, you know what, I like Kraven as much as the next guy, but this does feel like just a little bit of an odd choice. Maybe it was too much to expect this story to introduce a new and compelling villain, but still, I felt that this reveal just, fell a little flat, given this whole mystery that they were generating over the last few issues. One interesting thing to come out of Kraven's appearance in this last issue, however, is the fact that we find out that he was actually hired to take out Spider-Man by none other than the Green Goblin. And on top of that, all of the villains that Spider-Man has been facing throughout this book, they were actually all hired by Kraven on behalf of Green Goblin to take on Spider-Man. This mention of the Green Goblin is an unfortunate prelude of what is to come, It just shows that even when the goblin is seemingly dead or gone, he's always going to find some way to come back and haunt Peter's life. It's almost like he has a supernatural ability to just show up and ruin Peter Parker's day. But after this revelation, we really do get a special moment in the book. You see, earlier on in this issue, we find out that today was actually Valentine's Day, and Peter gets this anonymous Valentine's Day card. At first, he laughs it off, just saying that, it's probably from Aunt May, but we actually come to find out that it was none other than Gwen Stacy who sent this card. In that moment, when it's revealed that she was the one who sent the card, she confesses to Peter and they share a kiss, thus starting their relationship together properly. Last, we return to the blue silhouetted present, just like at the start of the book. Peter has this beautiful final monologue that kind of acts as a follow-up to the one at the start of the book. Peter explains how he's with MJ now and how he's healed from her death and how he's learned to love again. He ends with one final thought that really wraps up this story perfectly. He says, "I guess when I try to sum up how I feel sometimes around this time of year, I feel blue. Not like I've been dipped in the tidy bowl man, but like in music, in jazz, in feeling blue. And I long for a time when a girl I knew with an incredible smile and so much good in her heart made me think, life can be great." Then we end on one final panel that shows a photo strip of himself with Gwen. And that is the end of Spider-Man Blue. Truly an excellent Spider-Man story. Maybe not the best of all time, but it's definitely up there. I do think that this book gives you a great job at sort of getting a vague look of some of the early years of early Spider-Man. Of course, they're not going to share everything in Spider-Man's history in 6 issues, but what we do get here is a really compelling Spider-Man story. I think that if you are a fan of the character trying to get into the comics, this was an absolute great place to start. And if you are a more dedicated fan, it's a great way to take a look at some of those older years of Spider-Man and get those stories in a more modern format. There are also some genuinely really touching moments that are in this comic that will get, I think, most readers emotional. It got me emotional a few times. But I would definitely be lying if I said that this book was, 100% perfect. There are a couple of things that really kind of bother me about this book. First is this whole mystery villain thing. I found the reveal of what was actually going on in the last issue to be a little bit underwhelming. If you are paying attention, you can figure out who the mystery villain is and what's going on. There are definitely clues, but a part of me just had a sort of a sense of greater expectations for that part of the story, especially given how they were seemingly setting up this character as a mystery. In retrospect, this isn't the type of story to introduce some new big bad, but, if that is the case, then I kind of wonder why they bothered to include that secret villain storyline really at all. The other critique I have isn't entirely a critique of the book, it's something more of a double-edged sword. There are some positives and some negatives that come with this particular decision. My second problem with the book is that for a story about how Peter and Gwen fall in love, there's really not a lot of interaction between Peter and Gwen as characters. We learn that they mutually like each other, but most of the time in this book we are learning a little bit more about other characters in the supporting cast. Characters like Harry, Mary Jane, Aunt May, and Flash Thompson, of all characters, get more attention in this book than Gwen herself. And the most important part of this story, the death of Gwen Stacy at the hands of Norman Osborn, is actually never shown throughout this book. Now, despite the fact that we don't spend a lot of time with Gwen or get an adaptation of her death scene, Gwen's presence is still felt everywhere in this book. From the thought bubble monologue sprinkled throughout the story, to the scenes where everybody talks about how Gwen has a thing for Peter, but Peter is just, too dumb to see it, Gwen still occupies a lot of space in the story. I think that, in a way, Gwen's lack of a direct presence in the book supports some of the story's themes even more. The ultimate point of this story, after all, isn't exactly about how Peter and Gwen fall in love. Rather, it's more about how they actually don't really get a chance to fall in love. Their relationship is tragically cut short because of Gwen's untimely death at the hands of Norman Osborn. Peter, throughout this book, reminisces on all that lost time and all of those memories that he would never get to experience and share because of how she died. So just like Peter, we, as the audience, miss out on those moments. We don't get to see the two of them together. So while I still personally think I would have preferred to see more of Gwen, I do think it was something of a deliberate creative choice to try to limit her direct role in this story. And that decision does come with some positive effects. I think overall, due to the book's many strengths, I would give this book something of a 9 out of 10. And I would recommend it to anyone who's interested in getting into Spider-Man comics, or if you are just a general fan of the character, I think that this is definitely a must-read. There's a lot to like about the book, even if it's, not necessarily the best Spider-Man story of all time or anything like that. And there is something of a, really nice, meaningful message that's hidden in here, basically that, sometimes things in life don't work out exactly the way that we were planning for them to. And as unfortunate as that is, it's, also a part of life that we have to continue to, pick things up and try our best to move on. You don't need to necessarily forget about anything that has happened in the past, but you do have to have the strength to go into the future. So yeah, that's my opinion about Spider-Man Blue. If you have read this book yourself, please let me know what your thoughts on it are. I would love to hear what you have to say. And until next time, remember, I'm JustJoosh, and that's just my opinion. Thank you for listening.